Okay, guys, today we are going to start to finish up the end of World War II, a lesson that we've been working on for what seems a month. Um, the other day we finished up our lesson on D-Day, and today's lesson is going to focus on two things. Number one, a drive from the east and a drive from the west. So today is all about finishing up World War II in Europe, and then during our next class period, we'll go on to finish up the war totally by going back to the Pacific and seeing how that part of the war is going to end. Now, as I said in the beginning, Europe is going to experience by 1944 a drive from the east and a drive from the west. First off, let me explain to you what a drive from the east is. The drive from the east happens basically weeks after D-Day, and the Soviets, remember, after the Battle of Stalingrad, are going to start to counterattack, all right? And they are going to start moving from the east to the west, literally moving Germans away and out of the Soviet Union and pushing them back west through Poland and into Germany. So weeks after D-Day happened, on June 6, 1944, the Soviets are going to take the Balkans, and they're going to start to move the Germans out of the southeastern part of Europe in Greece. Now, by July of 1944, 1 month after D-Day happened, they're going to approach eastern Poland, and by 1944, they're going to move into Poland. Now, during this time period, the Soviets are going to be the first to experience concentration camps. Now, when they move into Poland, we'll show you a map next week when we talk about the Holocaust a little bit more. We're going to find out that most of the, if not all, of the major extermination camps that the Germans had were stationed in Poland. Auschwitz you've heard of before, and a few others. So the Soviets are going to let the world know what they were finding. So imagine them driving from the east to the west, coming into Poland, and then stumbling across the concentration camps and everything that was in it, all right? So the Soviets are actually going to be the first to tell the world about what's going on there. Now, by the end of 1944, the Soviets are going to push into northeastern Europe, and they're going to take back Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Eastern Europe and Romania, and Bulgaria by the end of 1944. So when we talk about the drive from the east, we're talking about the Soviets moving the Germans out of the northeastern part of Europe, the eastern part of Europe, and the southeastern part of Europe, and literally driving them back into Germany. Now, on this map, you can see that the red line, the farthest German advance into the Soviet Union, well, what I just explained to you were all the blue arrows moving to the left or moving to the west, okay? That is what we mean by the drive from the east. So if you start up top, you can see blue lines moving through Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, into Poland, into Hungary, into Romania. And if you look down south in Greece, you can see the blue lines moving the Germans away from that territory and pushing them back into Germany. Now, the drive from the west, okay, so at the same time the Soviets are moving the Germans back from the east, well, that's when D-Day happens. So when the Allied invasion of northern France happens, that starts what we call the drive from the west. So they're going to storm the beaches at Normandy. As expected, we're going to fight through northern France, and in about 2 months' time, we're going to move into Paris, and we're going to liberate the city of Paris, August of 1944. You can see the images here, that famous street in Paris that we'll talk about again, you'll see in your videos today. You're going to see the Americans now walking through that famous street. We saw it, the Germans at the beginning of the war, and now that's it. Talk about a huge party. The soldiers recount, and there's accounts of, you know, just a great time that the French people were so happy to see the Allies move into Paris and liberate that city by August of 1944. And you can Google those parties and see what happened there anytime you'd like. Great image there in the bottom left-hand corner. You see the Eiffel Tower with people just surrounding it, so happy to be liberated after 4 years of being ruled and occupied by the Germans. Now, the blue lines there are what we're talking about, all right? So as you're looking on the map, by October, the Allies are going to basically penetrate the Siegfried Line by October. And on top of northern Europe there, you can see that they're going to retake the port cities in France and in Belgium. Taking the port cities in Belgium and France were very, very important because we could supply our troops as we're moving those blue arrows from France into Germany. So once again, you can see a sandwich effect. You can see the Allies coming from the west. You can see the Soviets coming from the east and southeast. And you can see that we're just continuing to push up through the south. Remember, were pushing the Germans out of North Africa, out of Sicily, out of Italy, and then you can see in northern Italy by 1945, we are already pushing the Germans back into Germany. So you can see how the Germans are being basically sandwiched and pushed back into Germany by late 1944. Now, the Germans had one last ditch attempt of salvaging this war, and it's going to happen in between December of 1944 and January of 1945. And it's going to be one of the most famous battles ever fought in the history of military history. It's called the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler had one last ditch attempt of salvaging World War II, and it's going to happen in Belgium, in a place called Ardennes, the Ardennes Mountains and the Ardennes Forest. And that very famous battle was called the Battle of the Bulge. Now, this was the largest battle that was ever fought in Western Europe. Much bigger than any of the battles that were fought in World War I in the trenches, much bigger than the Marne, much bigger than Ypres, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Verdun. This was the largest battle ever fought in Western Europe. Now, we'll take it a step further. It's also the largest battle that the United States has ever fought in, okay? Basically what had happened is that the Americans by the end of this are going to have about 600,000 casualties, okay? So this is a huge loss for both sides. The Germans are going to drive a 50-mile wedge, or a bulge, which is where you get the name Battle of the Bulge in the video that you'll watch here in a second, into the Allied lines in Belgium, okay? It was withstood. It was cold. You're going to learn all about it here in a couple minutes. At the end of the day, the Americans are going to withstand. It is an Allied victory. 100,000 Germans are going to die. The 101st Airborne that had dropped in behind enemy lines on D-Day had fought across northern France. They had dropped into Belgium and Holland before, and now they're serving, once again, that 101st Airborne at the Battle of the Bulge. Now, you can see that in this image to the top left, you can see how the blue arrows represent the Germans moving into the Allied line. And you can see how it creates a wedge, a 50-mile wedge, all right, there in a city called Bastogne, there in Belgium, okay? You're going to hear about accounts of American soldiers that were there that they've never been more cold in their life. Early on in this battle, we didn't have the supplies for it, and so on. In actuality, General George Patton and his tank commanders from the south are going to come up that blue arrow, and they're going to come and save the day, basically, at the Battle of the Bulge. Now, I want you guys to stop for a second, and I want you to go and pause this and go watch the little video I have in Shobi on the Battle of the Bulge, and then come back to me. Okay, after the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies had basically a straight shot to Berlin, a straight shot to Germany. Now, by the spring of 1945, the German government began to collapse. This was already the time when there were plots already on Hitler's life. In your bell ringer, we learned about Valkyrie and the plot to kill him and so on. So basically, the German government was crumbling. Now, much before the spring of 1945, Hitler's high command had told him that he needs to surrender, but he just wouldn't do it, okay? Now, in April of 1945, the drive from the east and the drive from the west had concluded, okay? The Soviets and the Americans are actually going to meet, and they're going to shake hands in a famous place in Germany called Torgau, April of 1945. And it's a real famous image right there of Soviet soldiers on the right and American soldiers on the left shaking hands. And as you can see, there are no Germans in the middle, all right? So basically, this war is going to come to a complete halt. Now, the question was, when they got to the city of Berlin, the Americans and the Allies were outside the city and the Soviets were outside the city. The question was, what armies were going to take Berlin, the capital? Well, it was totally agreed upon by the Allies that the Soviets were allowed to take Berlin. And that's because of all of the casualties, civilian and soldiers, that happened because of the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Allies knew about Leningrad. The Allies knew about the Battle of Moscow and Kursk and the Battle of Stalingrad, and they gladly allowed the Soviets to take Berlin. Now, in a Catholic school, high school classroom, I cannot tell you that what specifically the Soviets did to the people of Berlin. They absolutely tore the city apart. I cannot tell you. You can do research and you can find out. But let's just say that there are accounts of German women that were living in Berlin that committed suicide rather than face the Soviet soldiers that were coming to Berlin. Now, also, what happens on April 30th, 1945, is the real famous story of Hitler committing suicide. There are tons of conspiracy theories. You're going to watch videos on that, and we'll talk about that over the next couple of class periods. But the way the war is going to end in Europe is literally Hitler committing suicide alongside his mistress, Eva Braun, who he had just married moments before, in a bunker that the Soviets are going to find. Now, there are tons of conspiracies, like I said, surrounding Hitler's suicide in this famous event. But the one major effect of this is going to be German surrender. And on April 30th, 1945, the Germans surrender in Europe in World War II. Now, on the image that you see here on this slide, you can see that the Germans had placed a fake of Hitler, and we have no idea to this day where the body is, but recent declassified information has come out that an old Soviet soldier has provided the world with a tooth that belongs to Hitler. And they did DNA on a test on a relative of Hitler's that lives in New York City, and it was tested positive, a positive match for Hitler. And it said that possibly the Soviets had gotten into the bunker and taken Hitler's body and buried it somewhere in the Soviet Union where someone will never see it again, because they didn't want that burial to be, or they wouldn't want that burial to be a place to go and remember this person who obviously was a monster in many people around the world's opinions then and since during World War II. Okay, and that's how the war wraps up. So VE Day, which was the title of our folder in Shobi today, is May 8th, 1945, and you're going to see Times Square in New York City. It was packed. Trafalgar Square was packed. The New York Times front page article, you can see there, the war in Europe has ended, surrender is unconditional, and it was just great times around the world. So at this point, we've concluded our lesson, and the victory in Europe was achieved. At this point, I'd like for you to watch the two videos that I have left for you in Shobi. One is on the death of Hitler and answer those questions, and the other is a good video on VE Day, where it takes you around Europe and shows how people are celebrating and things like that. So go watch the videos, and that will conclude this lesson at this time.